All right. Welcome back, grade 10s. So, we're going to wrap up this look at the rebirth of nationalism, and then you guys will have lots of free time with the mask break to continue your very engaging discussion about serial killers.
Yes.
And,
Can we watch a documentary?
It's weird because I had a psychology course last year, and we were studying serial killers, and my whole class, all they wanted to talk about was nationalism. They're like, can we talk about nationalism instead? Serial killers, they're so boring.
Yeah.
So anyway, we will have our mass break right after this. I just want to go over some sections of the 30-page reading that I had you skim through. Obviously, it goes into a lot of depth. And the reading is so extensive that it tries to show that there is no simple correlation between nationalism and globalism. That it points out some of the exceptions to the rule. But even so, I think that there's some stuff we can glean so we can move forward to Social 20. So, joining with me at the beginning of the document on page 2, I've highlighted lots of stuff that you could be summarizing into your notes. So, it begins by suggesting that there's two theories. One theory is that nations and nationalism will be the next stage of losers in the development of mankind. That we are going to evolve past nationalism, past nations, and begin to embrace more supranationalism, more globalism. So that's one possibility. But then the second possibility is far from disappearing. We could actually see the regaining strength of nationalism as a response to globalism. And we are definitely seeing that in the United States as they put kids in cages to keep America pure from illegal immigrants. But the article is suggesting that those are not the only two options. The article suggests that, in fact, globalism and nationalism can coexist. And they try to give us examples of that. This is the theory here. Nationalizing and globalizing forces can be complementary rather than contradictory, with nationalist actors accepting, embracing, and even promoting globalization for various often nationalist objectives. So the thesis, the argument that this article is trying to promote is that nationalists can use globalism to promote their nationalism. So you may have a group of people, maybe it's the Quebecois, the people of Quebec that would like to be separate from Canada. They might be able to use globalism to achieve nationalism. So what has often been seen as contradictory forces, globalism and nationalism, they're suggesting they don't have to be contradictory. That you can achieve your nationalist objectives through globalism. So one of the recurring themes in this article is that one of the objectives of nationalism is security. Security for your people, for your linguistic people, for your political people, for your ethnic people, for your cultural people, for your geographic people. Whatever kind of nation it is, nationalism is based on we want to protect our people. But then the article shows that sometimes globalism offers that protection. So Canada needs military protection. We turn to NATO. Canada needs military protection. We have NORAD. Ultimately, when countries need protection, they may turn to the UN. They may turn to instruments of globalism to protect their nationalism. So that's a unique relationship that they're being promoted here. The article talks about how some people were wishful thinking that maybe nationalism would die, including Marxists that thought that the workers of the world would unite and overthrow the capitalists. I would argue that the workers of the world are in and of themselves just another form of a nation. They're a socioeconomic nation. They're an occupational nation. They're an ideological nation. So, we go into a little bit more deep roots, and they're talking about how nations have deep roots that are based on pre-political, cultural, and ethnic identities. Their social, psychological, and moral significance sustain their power and explains their persistence. So Anthony Smith is saying nations aren't just cultural, because Canada doesn't have one culture. Nations are not just ethnic. Canada has multi-ethnicities. Nations are not just social or psychological. Nations are so much more than all of that wrapped together. And that's why nations still exist. So when you study nationalism in 20, we're going to say, here's an example of an ethnic nation. Here's an example of a cultural. Here's an example of a social nation. But the true sense of Canadian or American or German nationalism is so much more than just one of these elements. It's the synchronicity, right, of these elements combined in a German way or an American way that creates a nationalism. So, why do you have national movements? And we still have some, like the Quebecois of Canada. They're motivated by a desire to assure their existence and flourishing of their group. So again, what is nationalism? It's the promotion of your people. It's the wanting to secure your people. And again, there's different examples used to describe how it can't be just cultural, how it can't be just geographic, and how there's some groups that end up acting in ways that don't seem to make sense. That they may do something that on the surface may actually make them seem like they're putting themselves at risk. Why would little Georgia start a fight with big Russia? It's not in their national interest. Why would they be doing that? So the article does explore some of these contradictions and tries to make sense of them under the idea that Georgia is doing that against Russia as Georgia is embracing globalism. And through globalism, they think that they can still be Georgia. But if they embrace Russia instead, much like they were under the USSR, the Georgian national interest will be subject to Russian national interests. So nationalism in the history has been defensive, but it's also been expansionist. So when we look at German nationalism next year, we'll talk about Lebensraum, living space, and how it influenced German foreign policy leading up to World War II. And the whole point was that the Germans were looking to expand their living space, and it was an expression of their German nationalism. Nationalism, for example, Russian language says that we need our language because it's the great defender of our culture. It does look confusing when countries look at things, organizations like the EU. We have countries like Britain exiting, but we have other countries like Georgia wanting to jump in. So some countries see global alliances as a means to securing their nation. Others see global alliances as a security risk to their nation. Here the Georgians are talking about how the EU and NATO and non-governmental organizations and all these things actually make Georgia safer. So as Georgia becomes more interconnected, Georgia may have a future. But if Georgia was isolated, Georgia would be gobbled up by Russia. So with the borders becoming a little more permeable, nations like Britain say, we need to close our borders. That's why Brexit happens. Britain feels threatened by globalism. They want to close their borders to waves of immigrants. Georgia sees globalism as its only way to defend its nationalism. So that's the main points from the article. I think it's an interesting article. Where are we going to go next after our mask break? After our mask break, we are going to jump into a quick video about nationalism and globalism, and then we're going to look at the idea of possible futures. So we've been studying globalism, but we've been studying globalism by looking backward. Let's see, what will the next 40 years look like for mankind? So that's what we'll look at after the break. It's a beautiful day outside. Go outside, And be quiet in the hallways, because there might be some people writing some diplomas.